Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's segment right here on the Product and Packaging Powerhouse. I am your host and curator, Megan Young Gamble, Chief Project Officer at GLC, your packaging and project execution team, as well as the beautiful and lovely host of this podcast. And so, guys, if this is your first time coming to the podcast, welcome to the house. I always have the privilege and honor to speak with industry powerhouses to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly truth, and what is coming down in the pipeline of our industry to help you as brand owners and companies alike to help with getting your products into market and also how you need to be thinking about your full operational strategy. And so, if this is your first time, make sure you do hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel and your favorite audio platforms. We love a good rating, so make sure you leave a review of this conversation at the end because you will want to leave a review when we have this conversation for today. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege to speak with I have two powerhouses today. Can you believe that? I love when I have multiple powerhouses on one conversation, just more excitement and more things to talk about, and also the intersection of how they work with each other as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege to have Mr. Maurizio Carano, who is actually with MCC. If you're not familiar with MCC, they are Multicolor Corporation. He is the innovation director. He is actually international at the time of this call. So I will have him introduce himself and share a little bit about his background here shortly. And then my second powerhouse guest is Mr. John Dwyer, who is also the digital solutions and supply chain champion at Smurfit Restaurant. And I will have him do an introduction as well. But let me just say what we're going to talk about high level, which is thinking about packaging innovation, smart packaging, because everybody's starting to talk about it. It's like the new buzzword. But what does that mean in reference of how we actually execute the packaging, the level of detail we need to go through, innovation, and of course, sustainability. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a treat with my two powerhouses, Maurizio and John. Welcome to the show.
Thank you,
Thank
Megan.
you.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Yes, likewise, likewise. So I'm gonna start with John. John, I would love for you to do a brief introduction of yourself and how you led in the beautiful world of packaging and what you currently do at Smurfit Westrock.
Sure. Happy to do that, Megan, and great to be here. Thank you for the invite. So my role at Smurfit Westrock, you mentioned a little bit about smart packaging. I come out of my career is really 100% packaging. I started out working in games and promotions and consumer sweepstakes, things of that nature. And so worked with large food and beverage companies doing Super Bowl promos. And the common thread here is that those all require a level of serialization. It's like a lottery. There's one winning ticket or, a fixed amount of winning tickets. And so that's kind of my background in serialization. That translated to transaction cards. So I work closely with some of the big issuers like Visa, MasterCard, launching prepaid cards into retail. And then, which led me to Smurfit Westrock, where I use a lot of those same principles learned around creating parent-child relationships between packages to track and trace, to authenticate. Theft and counterfeiting is a huge issue today for major brands. All the brands struggle with this. And so a common denominator to solve supply chain problems, to help eliminate theft and fraud and some of the other issues, is to give each product its own unique identifier that can be traced all the way back to point of origin. So the common supply chain, one step forward, one step back, we want to go all the way back and create things born digital that have their own unique identity, and then take them all the way through to the recycling system so we don't just effectively guess at circularity and sustainability and carbon footprint. We actually have measurable sustainability, which I think is really a big difference. So my role works across the enterprise. I have a team that works within corrugated consumer, merchandising, distribution, and we help solve customer problems related to smart packaging.
Oh, guys, did you hear that introduction and his experience? Like, that's why I say you are going to be in for a treat for today with both of our powerhouses. And we're going to get into some of the questions that he mentioned around serialization, especially with track and trace, anti-counterfeit. That's a big thing we're seeing in the marketplace across all industries. But before we do so, we're going to have Mr. Maurizio do an introduction of himself and how he landed into the beautiful world of packaging. So, Maurizio,
Thank you,
I
Megan.
want you to do an introduction of yourself.
Yeah, a little bit less linear than John. I start as a chemist, an electrochemist. I don't know, you can look it up for the audience. I mean, it's a little bit trickier part of chemistry. And so I travel a little bit the world, different postdocs and positions in research. And then about 22 years ago, I started in packaging. As I mentioned, in some pre-questions, I started from the end of the line, stretch wrapping and shrink wrapping, and I worked my way up to primary packaging. So liquid packaging, labels, and now again in injection IML, what we do is labels for primary packaging. I didn't have an exposure to serialization or connected until I got to Avery Dennison, where we were working on connecting wine bottles and see if there was value in it, or measuring, apparel. That's the first application. But then really my crash course, I think, was when I met John. That was my first day at back then WestRock, now Smurfit WestRock. And instead of, I skipped all my HR introduction and I just jumped into a full day meeting or 2 days meeting. John was part of it, and all of a sudden that hit me, right? And because I think also my past experiences, I start trying to put together all the different aspects of supply chain. What does it mean to have a connected packaging throughout the lifetime of a package? Being in companies like Tetra Pak, very conscious about recyclability and material also, provenance and so forth. And so, yeah, everything kind of came together as a puzzle. And then we really got almost 3 years with John working on the topic. And I think we went down each single rabbit hole, but we also were able to then consolidate bottom up and give more direction to the whole discussion. So really excited to be with you and to be with John here, because again, packaging is my passion. Connected packaging is the next big thing, and it's here, I think.
Absolutely. And guys, let me just share. So, me and Maurizio have some similarities of our background. So, I was a chemist as well. I did pharmacology research and was supposed to go to pharmacy school, did not go back and pursue it, but I landed in the beautiful world of packaging by accident. So, you and I have a similar
Yeah.
background, how we got here. And guys, Maurizio, he just kind of glossed over it, but I'm going to put some respect on his credentials, okay, for just a second. He has a PhD in electrochemistry. Okay, so he has worked hard for his doctorate degree in research. So just have to put some respect on those credentials. Very similar to John, he has a lot of credentials and a lot of expertise too. So these are two powerhouses in their respective pursuit. And it's amazing how a lot of us either started in packaging or we transition into packaging. And here we are today to talk about connected packaging, smart packaging, recyclability, the metrics, and what we're seeing in the marketplace, because a lot of things are changing, in regard of the industry. And so my first question, I'm gonna ask this of you, Maurizio, is you've been in this industry for over 22 years. You've had the opportunity to work with some powerhouse companies. What have you seen from your experience of the evolution of packaging that has now landed into the connected packaging space?
I just really love the question because I can just go back memory lane. So I think, obviously functionality is like an essential, right? The fact that packaging needs to protect the product is like the basics, right? I always say the producers, the brands can do everything right. If the packaging is not right, their product will not make it to the shelf. Consumers will not pick it up if it doesn't look pristine, right? We all push that little box back in the back and we take the one in the front. And also it's not going to make it in terms of most of the times unpacking experience. And then we moved obviously to premiumization. Then all of a sudden it was all about shelf impact and how do we attract more customers, let's say consumers. How do we provide a tactile experience? So it's about surfaces and finishing and embellishment. Obviously not everything is the same. I'm just really bucketing everything together, but still very, very relevant. And then I would say big companies like brands like Apple, obviously, they just skyrocketed the unpacking, right? There were all videos on TikTok now to unpack stuff, which is amazing. But then now we are really coming to the point where packaging needs to actually do more than just those things. It's about connecting with the environment. It's about connecting with consumers, connecting with the supply chain. And that's where I saw the evolution throughout my career. And it was kind of hard, but the terrain was not fertile, right? The ground was not ready. We were working on RFID a long time ago, also John, and nobody was willing to pay more, or they didn't see the value, or the pain was not big enough, as we say in marketing as well. So that's what I saw as an evolution.
I love that. And John, same question for you because you've been in packaging your entire career. And so you've seen the evolution of packaging change. And so with connected packaging, smart packaging, what are some of the things that you've seen from an evolution standpoint as well?
Sure. Like Maurizio, I think that's a great question. And I would say to me, what's changed the most are the competing pressures on packaging. Maurizio called out aesthetics and performance and you can solve these things with different types of materials and other, high performance. You can take paper and laminate, BOPP and give it more strength or give it moisture resistance. But now what's changed is the circularity, the sustainability element of it. So this pressure of how do you make packages beautiful, right? How do you make them incredibly functional? But how do you do it in a way? I mean, really the goal is curbside recyclability, right? How
Mhm.
how do you get to that point? And it's such a kind of a dichotomy, right? You want to add more shine and more tactile, and all the things that Mauricio describes so well. And at the same time, you want to be able to break that packaging down, put it to the curb, and be able to reuse and recycle that. So to me, that's the biggest change is we're starting to see these pressures build. And so companies now, you hear things like ESG and EPR, which is extended producer
Yeah.
responsibility. There's these self-imposed company objectives that companies want to reach, which may be, plastic elimination by 2030 or 90% recyclable by, whatever that is a goal that companies have. But now we have government regulation starting to creep in a little bit and saying things like, hey, look, there's a difference between being recycled and recyclable. And California now has said, hey, look, we don't think you should put the chasing arrows on packaging if that packaging isn't actually recycled. Whether it's recyclable or not is a different story. So to me, that's where connected starts to play a role because you can tell the story, you can provide provenance, you can help customers or end use consumers understand what to do with packaging. And so I think that element of sustainability and circularity has kind of turned packaging on its head a little bit to
Yeah.
say, do all those great things that we want you to do from a consumer perspective. Oh, and by the way, if you don't kind of follow these best practices and principles, then your packaging may not be as compelling. So I think that feels like a big change to me.
Oh, guys, like this is a whole lesson in itself, just on, connected packaging and if it can be recycled or recyclable. Because to your point, John and Maurizio, like you both mentioned about circularity and sustainability. All these companies have ESG goals, and we have packaging EPR. We now have SB 54 in California. With me in cosmetics, single use plastics is a big conversation. And it's also that impulse purchase, products that we always have consumers purchase right at the pop displays, right before we check out. So we're seeing a lot of things change, not only in the industry, but also government regulation. And one thing that you all mentioned that I have to give a shout out to Vicky Stroll. She was one of my prior podcast guests where she talks about packaging design and the aesthetic of it, but also how to still leverage connected packaging into your design and what that looks like. But it also goes a little bit further than just the design. You have to think about upfront and really at the concept stage, what is it that we're creating? What does sustainability mean to us? What are these new regulations that we're seeing? But how do we leverage connected packaging, through each stage gate and each process that we have to ensure our customers and our consumers know what to do with the packaging as part of the circular economy. So it's a much larger conversation. And I say that because here where I live in Metro Atlanta, the city that I live in, we have curbside recycling. However, if you go to the MRF and see what they're actually recycling and what they're not, I'm like, well, why are you not recycling this? They're like, well, we don't have enough workforce. We don't have the technology. We don't know what should properly be sorted in transparency. So if there could be a way to intersect this connected packaging, not only from a consumer standpoint, but also the end of life, I think that's something huge. But I'm not in control of the infrastructure. I'm just sharing from a consumer perspective, on what I'm seeing in the marketplace and to your points. And so, John, I want to ask you, you talked about serialization and using it as part of a form of connected packaging. Most people may not know what serialization packaging is. So can you share a little bit about what that means and how it's possibly being used in the industry today?
Sure. So serialization, kind of in the basis form, is really providing a unique ID for each individual product. That can be done at the unit level, at the case level, at the pallet level. And typically it's in reverse of that, right? You start tracking at the container level, a pallet, a case, getting onto the unit level becomes more complex, more expensive. But think of it like a license plate, right? I made this metaphor for somebody, when you travel a lot, as I do, you rent cars. And if you, particularly in Colorado, this happened to me, some years ago, I was rushing back to the airport. I was on the expressway. I was speeding. The camera caught the license plate. And now there's a data chain, right? The license plate is linked to National Car Rental, is linked to me, to my credit card, to me, and my home address, and they're able to send me a ticket. And it's a great example of how data links together in a specific use case. So if you think about RFID in particular, which Maurizio mentioned, it's been around for 30 years, right? Each tag has a unique ID, and tags can actually be overwritten. They have memory, so you can add things like lot, batch, date to give more, a more robust data stream around that product and provenance. So that's one way that you can look at serialization. And Maurizio was a real thought leader in this space. We take the approach that we are sensor agnostic. Whatever that trigger is, it could be an alphanumeric code, like is on a gift card. It could be a serialized QR code, that pops up on your TV if they want you to scan it and, log into your cable provider, whatever that might be. It could be, there's new technology called BLE, which is low energy Bluetooth. And I think ultimately there isn't one technology that wins here. It will be a multi-sensor world, and the ability for each package to have a voice and communicate things as simple as, what am I? Where did I come from? Where am I supposed to go? When was I made? And what do you do with me when I'm done? How do you recycle this package? That voice and the ability to answer those kind of questions are important all the way through the supply chain, from consumer to circularity to sustainability. That's what we look at, is how do we use that license plate to give a package a voice.
Oh, that's such a great analogy, John, because as you mentioned about going to National Car Rental and renting the car and going through the light, getting the ticket, I've been one of those people too, to tell on myself. So I know the traceability back to my credit card, back to my home address to get the ticket. So I love how you explain it because it makes it more relatable and more concise to understand from a packaging standpoint of
Mm-hmm.
why this unique product ID is essential, from pallets to the case to the unit, which some aspects can be a little bit more complex and have more nuances. But it's very important because we're seeing more counterfeit. We're needing the track and traceability for different products and goods in the marketplace, especially going international. Maurizio is in Belgium, so he's seen a lot of things of what's happening internationally and in the US. And what does that mean when you're producing packaging for your brands? And so, John, I really appreciate you kind of giving a high level example of what serialization means. And so, Maurizio, I must ask you, thinking about serialization from
Mhm.
US to international markets, and with you also working at MCC that may produce a lot of labels and, for yogurt cups and other food products, how are you all incorporating serialization into your packaging strategy for brands?
Yeah, and I like the metaphor that John used about the voice, right? Because also there is a language, right? So in terms of serialization for labels has been around. Obviously, the pharmaceutical, end application is one of the biggest one because that's really strictly regulated. No, difference is I think the European market in general has been a little bit more advanced in some things. Definitely, retailers way more advanced in the UK versus other markets, also in terms of needs. In terms of regulation, also stricter regulation on single-use plastic. There's this PPWR coming up here in Europe that is going to be very, very strict. It's going to affect all form of packages, whether it's fiber, plastic, or whatever it is. And so that thing is going to be even more pervasive here first, and then in the US might be adopted afterwards. But I like the voice thing because John touched upon it. Interacting with the package is different for different players, right? If you're a consumer, you're not going to have an RFID reader in your pocket, but
Yeah.
you can always scan a QR code with the phone. But then if you are in an industrial environment or in a recycling mill, then you can definitely have the interaction with the RFID. So I think what we discussed, interoperability, I say with my fake British accent, it's very important. To John's point, it's not going to be one solution. The world out there is very complex. So even if you just compare the US to Europe, is already a huge complexity. If you compare each different states or maybe counties in the US, it's insane. To your point, curbside collection is true in some states, in some cities, and is not in others. So I think that speaking different languages for the different players throughout the value chain is essential, and all the way down to the consumer. And it's so difficult, again, as consumers, not even as packaging people, to know what to do, right? Here, I give an example. Belgium is really big in recycling. They have metrics on reducing the waste that is called others, and it goes to landfill. They have metrics and they publish them. And so you have a whole spiel of layout of pictures of types of packaging that you can recycle together. There's a PMD here, there's typically plastic, but your carton, milk carton, will go into that because there are layers, obviously, of polyethylene and different kind of plastics. So they make it very, very easy. I've not found this in any other countries at the moment. Maybe they have in some other places I've not been to, but it needs to be so easy for a consumer because otherwise we're not going to do the work, right?
Absolutely. And here in the US, I feel like we're still in the infancy stage compared to the EU, to be frank. In reference of how we think about the different metrics of recyclability, circular economy, sustainability, et cetera. Like we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go in transparency. And I think we're seeing that in real time. But being able to have the serialization and packaging can definitely help with that,
Yeah.
and through connected packaging and really ensuring that we are educating not only consumers, but also be going more upstream to the brand owners as regulations are changing, to then drive to the consumers, to then the end of life with the MRF centers and such. So we have a long way to go, but I think these are critical steps in this process to help us get to that point and really think about sustainability from a much larger picture instead of it being so broad and like, oh, we want sustainability, but nobody has a definition of what sustainability means or what that could look like. So I really commend both of your efforts, of what you're seeing and the work that you're both doing within the packaging space, because it is much needed, and like I shared, here in my city, my municipality, they just picked up curbside recycling, but when it goes to the MRF, some half of it's not getting recycled. So what are those metrics that we need in place? When you look at the different municipalities, the cities, the states, because John, you're in Minneapolis. How you all recycle things is totally different than how we recycle things here in the South in Georgia. So how can we start thinking about it on a much more grander scale and have some uniformity to it? Because there's no uniformity to it here. Unlike Belgium and other EU countries, it's more metrics and uniformity to how things are recycled. So it's interesting field, but still have a long way to go. But we're making some great strides overall. And so, as we're thinking about, serialization, trace and trackability, I want to ask you all to share what you've seen, in reference of some of the quick serve restaurant space. A lot of industries, a lot of companies like Chipotle and McDonald's are coming to market and they're in the quick serve restaurant space. And there's been some things around trace and traceability and what that looks like. So I would love for you to share a little bit of what you're seeing in that space and a case study you may be able to share as well around this space and why sterilization and connected packaging is really essential too. So John, I'll have you start.
Sure. So, you bring up an important point. Quick serve restaurant chains globally are under a lot of pressure, right? By nature, the quick turn inventory, there's a lot of product that flow through the door in times when, inflation is high. More people tend to, buy down and eat more at quick serve restaurants than maybe at sit down restaurants or fine dining establishments. So this pressure to do things fast, fresh, it gets intense. And so, if you follow the news, you've seen, Chipotle has had issues in the past. McDonald's sadly just had an E. coli outbreak that is still unknown as a source of origin, where one person lost their life. You see this even in deli meats, right? I mean, there was a huge issue around deli meats, and the brands are at tremendous risk in these categories. So, we think the ability to track and mitigate the expansion of, some of these issues. I'll go back, this is probably 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe not quite that long, but over Thanksgiving, there was a huge romaine lettuce recall, if you recall that, Megan. And it not only was it romaine, but if you went to the grocery store and wanted to have salad for Thanksgiving dinner, all leaf lettuce was gone. Boston lettuce, it was just all gone, right? Because they didn't know what the source of origin was. And I believe that was, maybe $100 million recall, which was absolutely incredible. So it was another one of these wake-ups to say, if you knew that the impacted lettuces, for example, came from even one state, let alone one farm or one field, that's the kind of granularity that you need to get to say, and kudos to McDonald's. They've identified a region that was impacted. They've looked at what they think is an onion supplier that may be the source of the E. coli outbreak. And so, as opposed to the lettuce, 1 in 5, I think there are 1 in 5 McDonald's restaurants stopped serving Big Macs for a short period of time. So even right then, you can see 20%. They reduced the amount of cost and the consumer risk associated with it. And that's all based upon traceability. Things like the FSMA, which is coming out in 2026, the Food Safety and Modernization Act, which is a government regulation that relates to traceability in certain categories. So I think, not only quick serve restaurants, but any brand, cosmetics, I mean, your background, Megan, any brand that is, either a food product or a skin product, or, something that can have a really measurable negative impact on a consumer, those brands are at risk. And if you don't have the ability and wherewithal to mitigate or put, bookends on issues that you have in your supply chain, the risk is everything comes back. And that, those huge recalls are done to protect the brand, but at the end of the day, it's bad either way. So having better visibility and traceability in your supply chain is really the only way to fix that.
So, I think McDonald's has definitely done a very good job to help mitigate and really, like you said, trace back to the origin of like their different suppliers, taking certain things off the menu to help with that. So I think it's a really great job that McDonald's has. And I'm seeing more and more cases of Listeria, E. coli that's coming to market. So having this traceability, back to the origin, is really important. And I remember when I went to Spec Right Summit earlier this year in Austin, they talked about traceability from different farms, the different salad mix blend. This is when the romaine lettuce and the spinach and it was all part of that green leafy, all the green leaves that was removed from shelves because people didn't know. But I remember one company was talking about how they were able to trace back the origin of their suppliers and their farms to know if certain farms were impacted, before it went into mass production of their salad mix blends. So to your point, John, traceability is very key because now consumers are more intentional and they want to be educated and they want to know the source of anything, especially like in the beauty space. For me, everybody wants to know what's the origin of this key ingredient. I've heard some misconception about a key ingredient that shouldn't be used. But if you have the origin and where it comes from and how it's actually more impactful and beneficial for the efficacy of the product, it may help dispel some of the myths around it. So I think traceability is very key. And so, Maurizio, I would love to ask you, from your perspective,
Yeah.
Working with MCC, like, how are you all thinking about traceability, with the labels and injection moldings and stuff like that for the products that you all are creating for the brands?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the same, and John described really very well the whole thing about really sort of an insurance, right? You want to make sure that you just are very intentional in recalling and narrowing down the problem if anything happens for any reasons. And so obviously we're looking at it with the same angle. I think then there's the other part of the value for the supply chain is that we're to know where the stuff is at each point in time. So if you have solutions like RFIDs, then you're able to better manage your inventory. You're better equipped to understand what's in your warehouse. And then you go beyond just food products, right? You go through industrial products. You don't have to spend hours and hours running inventory. So I think we see them the same way, and being obviously primary packaging, food integrity is essential. And then on top of that, inventory management becomes an added value or the primary value typically for whoever is running the business. Whether it's a quick serve restaurant, they know exactly where their beef patties are, and if they need to divert some of those from one store to another one, and that's the same for any other business. And also about deliveries, right? There is always pressure on delivery on time and in full. If you can prove to your customer that your supply of these products went out of the door at the right time and in full, then you sort of have insurance for your business that you're not going to get claims where somebody say, hey, I didn't receive the pallet. Well, guess what? When this pallet transited through the warehouse, it was depalletized, that we know because we lost a bunch of those RFID, those unique codes, and then that's where the loss happened. And you can really pinpoint. And obviously, all the food safety just piggybacks on that traceability. So I think there is extra value in there too, and lowering the total cost of operations for everybody involved in the supply chain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maurizio, one point he made about insurance, I think is so important, is, that traceability has been primarily focused on supply chain. It's so, point A to point B, but we're now starting to see traceability being used around anti-theft, anti-diversion, anti-counterfeiting.
Yep.
So the same technology is now kind of expanding use case. And it's one of the most interesting concepts that Maurizio brings up is the idea of technology as insurance, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as a consumer goods manufacturer, your risk and liability is lower if you utilize some of this technology. And Megan, that hasn't been tapped into at all.
Mm.
Like, I think that's one of the most,
Mm.
as we start to see the extension of technology in the supply chain, the idea of risk mitigation, liability reduction, kind of insurance, packaging as insurance or intelligence as insurance, I think is one of the most interesting concepts that has not really been explored broadly. That was a great thought, Maurizio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think John, you touch upon that one just real quick because we went to the NRF Protect, and it was all about diversion, theft, and was it like 2% of sales turnover for retailers?
Yeah,
So
it's huge.
that's massive. It's a huge amount of billion of dollars that get stolen, diverted, and so there's a huge untapped opportunity, as John was saying, about being able to do that. If you look at stores like Targets or others, in some places they need to put products under glass, right, in a cupboard, and then all of a sudden you have lost sales because guess what? I'm gonna go there. I need to wait for 10, 15 minutes. I'm bothered.
Yep.
I'm gonna order it online. Why would I stay there a minute longer? And then all of a sudden you're losing sales. Yeah. So a lot of
It,
untapped
it
values, I think, there.
it's interesting,
Yeah.
Maurizio. It's like the solution, the short term solution, is to go back 100 years and put
Yeah.
everything behind the counter or behind glass instead of leveraging
Yeah.
technology. And
Yeah.
I know it's
Yeah.
just a short term solution, but it is sobering to walk into a store and see things as essential as shampoo and deodorant and
Right.
Yeah.
cosmetics and some over the counter that you just can't get to without calling someone. It blows my mind to see that
Yeah.
happen.
Absolutely. And I know even for me, from a consumer standpoint, I've been a little frustrated when I go to the stores and I'm like, where is the sales associate to help me get the shampoo, the
Mm.
Dove body wash or whatever? And I have to wait 10, 15 minutes because there's not enough people working in the store. So then I'm like, okay, I walk around, look at everything else, but then I come back and I'm like, where is this person? I'm just trying to get body wash, shampoo, just basic essentials.
That's right.
But to your point, we're having to think about the insurance, that is in place, not only for manufacturers and suppliers alike, but even for retailers, to
Hmm.
that point with counterfeit, theft, and things of that sort. So loss prevention at its finest. And so, John, I would love to ask you, you mentioned about technology has not really been tapped into, from this pursuit. So what do you think is needed for technology to be optimized to help with the space and be leveraged more?
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. One, is the ability to have packaging be recognizable in every node of the supply chain. And that requires, it could be equipment investment, capital investment. A great example is many retailers use RFID to track product into the store for apparel, footwear, tires, batteries, sport. I mean, there's all these categories that are RFID enabled. And yet for high value product, they put a little sensor on it that is unrelated to the supply chain. And all it does is set off an alarm when you go through the stanchions when you're walking out the door. Well, it's counterintuitive, right? You've got this very prescriptive supply chain where you're tracking individual products, and whether it's a pharmaceutical or some other type of high value product that gets to the store. And then when it's in the store, if somebody steals it and walks out the door, first of all, nobody does anything, right? Because they're
Right.
instructed not to have that kind of
Not
an
to do anything.
interaction with the guest, but you don't know what left the store. So it's like shouting fire in a movie theater. Like, there's an alarm, something happened. You don't know what it is. You don't know if it was a theft or so. I think the interoperability amongst technology becomes really important. And that gets down to this idea of, multiple sensor environment, a product, to Maurizio's point, you don't have an RFID reader on your phone. Nobody has that today. But you can scan a QR code. So if a package had an RFID that was used to track it through the supply chain, and then a linked QR code that would allow consumers or asset protection professionals, to check products that are sold on eBay or, other online marketplaces. That's where a lot of this stolen merchandise ends up. But you don't have a good way to tie everything together. So I think the technology is there in buckets. It's the interoperability that doesn't exist today that I think that is what really ties things together and gives you that circularity, that view from start to finish of where a product, not only where it is, where it's supposed to be, and if it ends up in another location, where did it come from, so that you can start to create, better transparency within your supply chains.
Very profound. And I appreciate you for sharing that because I'll be honest, I didn't really look at it from that 10,000-foot view. I only looked at it when I'm in the store. You have the actual sensor that may detect when you're walking out. But to your
Hmm.
point, you don't know what may be taken out the store when
That's
that
right.
alarm goes off. And so you have loss prevention, but you have to manually go and do your inventory count to see what possibly is missing compared to the sales of the transaction in that specified period of time. So I didn't even think about that. But to your point, the technology is not, it's inoperable of how it currently is, and it's currently in buckets. But there's
Yeah.
definitely room for improvement. And hopefully, with your expertise, you can kind of help change that landscape, not only for food and beverage, pharmaceuticals, but really all industries, from
Well, you
apparel
you
to
you
footwear and
nailed it.
everything.
Yeah, you nailed it, Megan. The stores want to be able to have granularity down to ones, right? Because when you
Hmm.
go online and you order something, it may say three left in store. You may drive over there and there's zero left in store. That's very
Exactly.
frustrating from a consumer perspective. So the
Yeah.
leakage that occurs in different places in the supply chain actually can result in a negative consumer experience, which may make you decide, I'm not going to go to this big box retailer. I'm going to go to this one because when they say something's there, it's actually there. And that's a
Yeah.
huge, that means a lot from a consumer standpoint.
Yeah. It becomes a competitive advantage, really. And it's.
Exactly. Oh, we could talk about this all day, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I want to ask you both a couple questions around sustainability because you both mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation. And so, Maurizio, I want to start with you because with you now being the innovation director at MCC, you all have two innovative technologies. You have the next cycle IML and then the molded fiber labeling. So, share with us a little bit about how these technologies work and what's the sustainability impact, that they've had for your consumers and pushing it out to market.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you for that question because it's also interlinked with the regulations, right? So IML labels are already recyclable because it's polypropylene on polypropylene, so it's a monomaterial. But then legislation will come in definitely in Europe now, And we don't know what actually that is going to look like. So we're working on multiple options to address the legislation. So in this case, for next cycle, it's the idea that once you are putting your packaging, your polypropylene packaging, your buckets of yogurt, whatever, into the grinder, into a mechanical grinder that they use for recycling, the label will mechanically detach. And then by air filtration, as they call it, you separate the label part from the hard part, from the wall of the package. And so you have a mechanical separation, and important is that the ink will stay on the label. You don't want ink to be washed off from anywhere, because then they're going to end up in the environment. So that's really strict requirement that we're trying to comply with, although at the moment, again, an IML label is absolutely recyclable because it's part of the package and it's a monomaterial. But that also tells you how difficult and stringent the legislation can be. And then sometimes we don't even know all the side effects of it, right? So, but the idea, it's noble in a way, because at the moment, since you're regrinding everything together, you don't have anymore a clear polypropylene or a white polypropylene. It's always like a grayish color when it recycles in granules. And so this idea will allow to fully, not upscale, but the circularity of that container. And then you can use in other applications what is left of the label. So it's actually a good thing to do, because you're keeping that material at the highest possible utilization. It's not an upcycle yet, but at least you're on one level higher. So that's the justification on next cycle. And again, it's a great product. It works according to the stringent, test and so forth. For the fiber, obviously, part of it is, okay, now we are applying plastic labels on plastic container, but what happens if we need to apply a label on a fiber package, which is totally different, right? And so that comes exactly from these trends and needs of having more fiber-based packaging for certain applications. You cannot, as usual, do all of them, but at the same time, we acknowledge that, the fiber is a good reality for certain applications. At the same time, then you stumble into cost, because a fiber tray, a fiber container is typically more expensive than a plastic one. Plastic has, a lot of impacts and so forth, but it's obviously a great material, low energy consumption to make. And so then you're struggling against the commercialization of it, because unless there is a legislation pushing it, customers, brands will not adopt it if it's so much more expensive than your standard. Unless you apply to some niche products, super organic, if you have a higher retail sales price for your product, then you can bear a little higher cost for packaging. But so those are the two things. But again, I love all this combining together, because you talk about legislation extensively, and this is where also a lot of innovation drives, and then also starting early. Because by the time legislation kicks in, you need to have a foolproof, industrialized solution at the right price as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of these things, even for the brands I work with, they're trying to think about it downstream. And I'm like, no, guys, we have to think about this upstream, because
Yeah.
everything that we're doing and we're producing has an implication on the back end. And if we're not thinking about the regulations now and thinking about the rollout of the products and when it will hit the market to start being compliant now for the future state, we're already behind the A curve. And then we're
Yeah.
spending more investing more money to redevelop it, to remanufacture it, to repackage it, to retest it. So it becomes this big investment and definitely a heavy cost implication to the
Yeah.
brands. And so I really love how you talked about the two innovations that MCC has, and really the umbrella of sustainability that y'all are looking at from an operational supply chain
Mm.
standpoint, and then also packaging, but also thinking about it from the regulations too, and helping to be
Yeah.
compliant with the regulations. So I really appreciate that. And so, John, I'm gonna ask you this question because you mentioned earlier about how Smurfit Westrock has some measurable metrics in place around sustainability, and with the integration of smart packaging, connected packaging, and serialization. Like, what are you all doing from a sustainability standpoint to help track these metrics and have the improvement here in the U.S.?
Yeah, sure. A couple things. And I've got to give props to Maurizio because these are projects that he also worked on, I think, extensively. One was around Smurfit Westrock makes a lot of pizza boxes. And in the US, particularly during the pandemic, pizza grew like crazy. Like just the amount of pizza boxes generated were astonishing. And there's a misconception that pizza boxes can't be recycled because of grease content. So, in addition to being a packaging manufacturer, Smurfit Westrock is one of the largest manufacturers of corrugate in the US. Because of that circularity point, we need good quality recycled corrugate to feed our mill system to make more corrugate, right? So it's part of the process. So we did the testing, and what we found out was pizza boxes are recyclable, even with grease content. And working with some of the largest pizza purveyors in the world, we have been communicating via QR code on the outside of the pizza box the ability to scan the pizza to identify, geolocate where you're at. We accumulated, there's 20,000 different recycling jurisdictions in the US, and we put together a listing of which jurisdictions explicitly say you can recycle something, all the way to ones who explicitly say you shouldn't. And then we've helped assist consumers and the QSRs in that space to start changing the messaging to consumers, because we do not want pizza boxes in the trash. We want them in the recycling bin. They are curbside recyclable. So that was a huge initiative. That was a partnership with our customers to help identify that these products actually should be recycled. And then the second one, from a measurability perspective, we actually put some RFID readers into one of our recovery facilities. You've been to those before, you know what that's like. And over the in-feed conveyor, we mounted readers that could pick up RFID signals that were on products. And we did some testing by putting our own RFID enabled products in there. And what we found was that we were able to recover or have visibility to 97% of the product that was fed into that space. So we were pulling category information. As you can imagine, after in January, there was a tremendous amount of TV boxes being recycled. And we were able to identify those down to the brand, to the 40-inch OLED. I mean, we knew all the information because it's embedded in the RFID tag. Mr. Coffee machines and Keurigs. And so the ability to brand as well as identify recycled materials, we think that there's just a treasure of data that can be uncovered at a recycling facility to help our customers meet their ESG goals measurably, right? We know what's going into the recycling stream. And so when sensors like that are being attached to packaging, that gives it that visibility, that voice. And oh, by the way, we also did the same testing to validate that when you add a sensor to the package, it doesn't negatively impact the recyclability of it. So we've actually published that report on our website within the last 30 days so that our customers know we're not suggesting that they do something that's detrimental to the environment. It's actually good for the environment because we can measure now, and it doesn't, mitigate the amount of fiber that we can recover.
Nice. And John, I would love to get that report to share with our listeners and viewers so they can actually look on, Smurfit Westrock's website to learn about it, to read more about it, because to your point, there's so much around sustainability and how you measure it. But it really comes down to the brands to understand, what does sustainability mean to you as the brand, but then also what are the regulations in place. So there's so much complexity to it. And we just hit just the tidbit of today's topic, because we could go on for hours to talk about this, but our time is limited for today, listeners. So with that being shared, John Dwyer and also Maurizio Carano's information is down in the show notes for you all, with their direct email, their company website, and also their direct LinkedIn. Please connect with them. Please follow them. Please get engaged with them. Please read the reports. They're doing a lot of great work in this space. And there's something that all of us can learn from these two powerhouses I've had the privilege to speak with today, to talk about connected packaging, smart packaging, serialization, and then, of course, how sustainability is incorporated into the approach as well. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we're getting to wrap up our conversation for today, we always like to go into what we call our fun round, which is the power round. So it's 90 seconds of fun, fast facts, asking each of our powerhouse guests about some of the fun facts they shared with us. And so I'm going to start with Maurizio first, and to share what he talked about. So his fun fact is he has more green cards and working permits than anyone else on this planet. Okay. And then he also said he has moved 20 times in 30 years. So we are going to put 90 seconds on the clock and we're going to ask Maurizio some fun questions around what he shared with us and see how well he does under pressure. So, Maurizio, you
Okay,
ready?
wonderful.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, since you have moved 20 times in 30 years, what has been one of your favorite places you've stayed at thus far?
I did love Austin, Texas, but I also enjoy Lausanne, Switzerland. You're asking about places, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
those are two. Belgium is not too bad.
Okay. Nice.
So
So, which country have you held the most work permits for to date?
it must be United States. This is my third green card at the moment.
Okay.
But I
What
also
has,
had H1 and J1. I'm sorry, I had a multitude of visas for this country, for that country. Yeah,
oh,
anyway, sorry.
okay. What's the strangest or most memorable experience you've had while moving 20 times in 30 years?
Oh my gosh. I think probably Australia was the biggest one. The longest trip ever, as we all know. And then yeah, everything is different. And yeah, it's totally different
Okay.
way of doing things in a way. Yeah.
Okay. If you had to pack your life into one suitcase, what would be the three most essential items?
I need my shaver,
Okay.
definitely a toothbrush, and then probably a watch. Yeah. Those three
Okay.
things.
Okay. And since we have 8 seconds, I'll ask you, what does packaging mean to you?
I think now is just really part of my life. It's like what I do and what I live every day,
Okay.
including my fridge.
Nice. Nice. And right at time. So very good, Maurizio. You worked well under pressure. I can
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah.
So awesome. So John, we're going to put 90 seconds on the clock and put you under the power round to ask you about some of your fun fast facts. So ladies and gentlemen, John shared with us he has performed in several musical stage shows and he also learned how to tap dance for a role. So we're going to put 90 seconds on the clock to see how well he does under pressure based upon his fun fast facts. So John, you ready?
I am ready.
Let's do it. So, since you had to perform a tap dance for one of your roles, share with us the name of the stage play and also what is your favorite tap combination?
Yeah, so the show was Annie Get Your Gun, which is kind of those types of musicals are what I primarily performed in. And I had to learn how to tap dance in cowboy boots. So it was a very limited in terms of repertoire. And I would say my favorite combination was staying upright while tap dancing, and singing was about all I could manage. That was walking and chewing gum and juggling bowling balls as far as I was concerned.
Hey, standing upright and not breaking the ankle is important with tap dancing. I understand.
Yes, it is.
So, in order for you to learn how to tap dance in cowboy boots, name one of your top tap dancers of all time.
Oh, geez. I would have to dig. I mean, I used to love to watch all the dancers from the 40s and 50s, from the Bob Hope, Bing
Yeah,
Crosby kind of an era. They were
yeah.
just so elegant and they made dance and music just flow. So to me, watching those kinds of shows were really inspiring. I know it was specifically a tap dancer, but it was the ability to incorporate dance, singing, and acting into this kind of like La La Land, right? It was a kind of a
Okay.
reinterpretation of those kind of shows. That's always inspirational to me, and I marvel at the ability of those performers to do all of that at the same time. I think is incredible.
Oh, I like that. Okay. And last question for you. If your life was depicted as a musical stage play, what would be the name that would be displayed on the marquee?
Oh, it would probably be something with packaging, sadly. Like Maurizio, I do most of the grocery shopping in our family because I love to be in a retail environment. It's so impactful. I'm so fortunate in my career to see, these developments impact not only customers and consumers, but my own family. We pay attention to, what we eat and the things that we buy. So my musical would be all about packaging, and that would be a pretty good summation for me. That's my life.
Hey, I can't wait for that to hit the stage play and see it in the big lights. So we look
There you
forward.
go. Thank
Awesome.
you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have had the privilege of speaking with Maurizio and John, where we talked about connected packaging, serialization, and of course, sustainability. With their expertise, they shared more during this episode of how you need to think about the track and traceability, Also, how to help with the insurance standpoint. We're saying that in quotes, to help with preventing counterfeit and theft. And then also how you need to think about sustainability and the circular economy, not only for the packaging that is being produced, but also the regulations that are in place, because there is a difference of recycled and recyclable. And so please make sure that you do connect with our two powerhouses, John Dwyer and Maurizio Carano. Their information is down in the show notes below. So that way you can get connected with them, and also how you can leverage connected packaging into your supply chain and your strategy. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Product and Packaging Powerhouse. I am your host, Megan Young Gamble. All of our information is down in the show notes. And if there's a topic that you would love to hear, make sure you send it to us. We would love to get your input and help bring other powerhouses to highlight these critical areas around packaging and products. And so, without further ado, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave some love for our powerhouses as well of what you thought of our conversation for today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.